Hi, this is Ryan, and I'm honestly just sitting here looking at the box for this Kingston portable drive, trying to figure out how they legally get away with printing up to 2,000 megabytes per second right on the front in big foil letters. Because yesterday, I plugged this exact drive in to offload about 120 gigs of 4K video files. For the first 30 seconds, it was flying, felt like the future. And then the progress bar just fell off a cliff. It cratered to 140 megabytes a second. That's slower than a spinning mechanical hard drive from 10 years ago. Also, the aluminum shell got so hot, I genuinely didn't want to keep my thumb on it. I started digging into the spec sheets of this drive, the Samsung T9, a couple of those popular SanDisks, and realized something that almost nobody mentions when reviewing these things. If you buy tech to actually use it in the real world, not just to run a 5-second benchmark, consider hitting subscribe so we can keep figuring this stuff out together. Because there's a massive industry-wide trap hiding in almost every mid-range portable SSD on Amazon right now. And to spot it, you have to know exactly what happens to the silicone inside this chassis right after minute 3. I've got 3 drives sitting in front of me right now: the Samsung T9, the Kingston XS2000, and a bare Western Digital NVMe drive that I shoved into a heavy $40 chunk of aftermarket aluminum. If you look at the marketing, the 2 retail drives, the Samsung and the Kingston, tell you they hit speeds of up to 2,000 megabytes per second. It's a very specific phrase, up to. Here's what that actually means in your house, on your desk, when you're 5 minutes late for a meeting and you're just trying to back up a project before running out the door. Actually, wait, I keep saying drive, but we need to quickly establish what's actually inside these enclosures. There are no moving parts anymore. It's just silicone memory chips, a controller chip to manage the traffic, and a bridge chip that translates that traffic to your USB port. And the dirty little secret of the entire storage industry is that modern high-density flash memory, the stuff that allows you to buy a 2 terabyte drive for under $150, is inherently physically slow at writing data. Like, painfully slow. Slower than a spinning mechanical hard drive from 2012. So how do they print 2,000 megabytes a second on the box without getting sued into oblivion? They use a trick. It's called an SLC cache. Think of an SSD like a person working at a desk. The main flash memory is a massive, heavy filing cabinet. Opening drawers, organizing folders, shoving data in, it takes time. But the SLC cache is just a plastic in tray sitting right on top of the desk. When you start copying a large file, the drive doesn't put it in the filing cabinet. It just dumps it into the in tray as fast as humanly possible. Boom, 2,000 megabytes a second. You look at your screen, the progress bar is zooming, and you think, wow, money well spent. But what happens when the in tray gets full? The drive has to stop taking new files, grab the stock from the tray, and start manually putting it into the filing cabinet. And suddenly, your transfer speed doesn't just dip, it crashes. I watched the Kingston XS2000 go from roughly 1,800 megabytes a second down to about 180 megabytes a second the exact moment it hit 100 gigabytes of transferred data. And because that specific drive is completely DRAM-less, meaning it doesn't have a dedicated memory chip just to keep track of where files are located, the internal controller starts panicking, trying to organize data on the fly. That's the SLC Cache Trap. They sell you the speed of the in tray, but you are actually living with the speed of the filing cabinet. You're probably thinking, okay, but 100 gigs is a lot. I just transfer photos and small video clips. The in tray is big enough for me. And yeah, I thought that too, except the in tray isn't a fixed size. On most modern drives, the cache is dynamic. It uses a percentage of your empty storage space to act as that fast tray, which means the fuller your drive gets, the smaller your fast cache becomes. If you have a 1 terabyte drive and you've got 850 gigs of family videos, Steam games, and old backups on it, your cache is practically gone. You don't get 100 gigs of fast transfer anymore. You might get 5 or 2. You plug it in, try to move a single 10 gigabyte 4K video file, and halfway through, the drive just hits a brick wall. And that's before we even talk about the physical ports on your computer. Let's look at the Samsung T9. It's a great piece of hardware. It feels premium. It has this textured rubberized grip that feels exactly like a car steering wheel. It advertises 2,000 megabytes per second using a USB protocol called Gen 2x2. If you own a Mac, Any Mac, even a $6,000 M3 Max MacBook Pro, you do not have a Gen 2x2 port. Apple refuses to support that specific intermediate standard. They support 10 gigabit USB and they support 40 gigabit Thunderbolt. They skip the 20 gigabit middle ground entirely. So if you buy the Samsung drive because it says 2000 megabytes per second and plug it into your MacBook, the drive defaults down to the 10 gigabit standard. You instantly lose half the speed you paid for. You are hard capped at 1000 megabytes a second, and that's before the cache fills up. Samsung knows this. Apple knows this, but I guarantee you the guy at the electronics store selling it to you does not know this. I almost got fooled by this myself. I was looking at my laptop, swapping cables, fully convinced I had a faulty drive. But no, the drive was doing exactly what it was programmed to do. We are paying premium prices for burst speeds that we can only experience under perfect conditions with empty drives on very specific computers. But it actually gets worse because speed is only half the lie. The other half is what this speed physically does to the silicon inside these plastic boxes. So let's talk about heat, because this is where the physics of these tiny plastic boxes totally break down. When I was transferring that massive batch of 4K video files onto the Kingston XS2000, I went to unplug it after the transfer finally finished, and I physically recoiled. I'm not exaggerating. The metal center of that tiny drive felt like I just picked up a pebble off a dashboard in the middle of July, which made me wonder, what is happening inside that case? I grabbed a FLIR temporal camera I keep in the studio and pointed it at a few of these drives while they were under a heavy write load. And what I saw completely changed how I look at rugged portable SSDs. You've probably seen those SanDisk Extreme portables, right? The ones with the little orange carabiner loop. Every field photographer on YouTube seems to have one dangling off their backpack. If you hold one, it has this textured, rubberized coating. You squeeze it, it gives a little, it feels drop-proof, it feels safe. But rubber is an insulator. Inside these enclosures, you have an NVMe drive and a tiny bridge chip, the traffic cop that translates the NVMe signal into a USB signal. When you push data at 10 or 20 gigabits per second, that little bridge chip draws power, up to 15 watts in some cases. Okay, let me put that into perspective. An M1 MacBook Air processor draws about 15 watts under heavy load, and Apple cools that by attaching it to an entire laptop made of solid, heat-dissipating aluminum. Storage manufacturers are taking that same amount of heat, sealing it inside a tiny plastic box and wrapping it in a rubber wetsuit. The controller chips inside literally start to cook. When silicon gets too hot, it does the only thing it can do to prevent melting. It thermal throttles. It forcefully chokes your transfer speeds to a crawl just to survive. So even if your SLC cache, that fast in tray we talked about earlier, is still full, your drive will still crash to hard drive speeds because it's suffocating. I was sure this was just a necessary evil of portable drives. You want it small, it gets hot. I was half wrong. It's a choice. Look at this chunky ribbed metal block sitting on my desk. This is a $40 aftermarket USB 4 enclosure from a company called Zk. It's ugly, it's heavy. When I slotted a bare Western Digital SN850X drive into it, I had to physically peel off a sticky thermal pad, press it onto the memory chips, and screw the aluminum lid down so the metal made direct contact with the silicon. When I run 200 gigabytes of data to this drive, the outside of the aluminum gets noticeably warm. Not burning, just a heavy radiating warmth. And the transfer speeds never drop. It sustains roughly 2,500 megabytes a second forever because the heat is actually escaping. The major brands aren't giving you massive aluminum heat sinks because aluminum is expensive to machine and plastic is cheap to mold. They sell you a rugged rubber bumper knowing full well it degrades the drive's performance. Actually, degrades isn't the right word. In some cases, it outright kills it. If you followed the tech news late last year, you know that thousands of those exact SanDisk Extreme V2 drives were suddenly wiping people's data. Photographers were plugging them in and the drives were just mounting as uninitialized, dead, gone. Western Digital pushed a firmware update, but hardware teardowns heavily suggested the underlying components were physically failing, likely stressed by poor thermal management and cheap solder joints. Which brings me to the absolute most infuriating part of this whole industry, the bait and switch. Let's say you watch a review of a portable SSD from 6 months ago. The reviewer tests it, confirms it has high-quality TLC memory chips, which are durable and maintain decent speeds even when the cache is full. You buy the exact same model, same box, same barcode. You run a test, and it's 50% slower. Why? Because midway through the production lifecycle, the manufacturer quietly swapped out the premium TLC chips for cheaper, slower, less durable QLC chips. They didn't change the model name, they didn't lower the price, they just banked on the fact that you wouldn't notice. I honestly didn't believe this was a widespread issue at first. I assumed reviewers were just getting cherry-picked golden samples. But I bought two identical budget drives months apart, ripped the cases open, and looked at the microscopic laser etching on the memory chips. Totally different hardware. One was great, the other was e-waste. So you have drives that lie about their speed using cache tricks, drives that choke themselves to death because they're wrapped in rubber, and brands quietly downgrading the silicon while charging you the same premium price. It feels like you literally can't win if you buy what's on the shelf. But you can. You just have to stop buying what they want you to buy. Here is what I'm actually doing with my own money now. Because after seeing the thermal throttling on that FLIR camera and pulling my hair out over the whole Mac compatibility issue, I refuse to play the retail lottery anymore. This is the loophole, the asymmetric fix to an industry that wants you paying a premium for a rubber bumper and a fake speed limit. You build it yourself. Actually, wait. Build makes it sound like you need a soldering iron and an engineering degree. I keep saying build, but what I really mean is assembling a two-piece Lego kit. You go on Amazon and you buy a bare internal PCIe Gen 4 NVMe drive. Specifically, you buy something with a proven track record of using high-quality TLC memory. I was checking the prices in the last 48 hours just to be sure the math still adds up, and right now a 2TB Western Digital SN850X is hovering right around $190. Then you buy a dedicated heavy-duty aluminum USB 4 enclosure. Satechi makes a great one. Zyke makes a solid one. They run about $100. When the boxes arrive, you slide the metal tray out of the enclosure. You angle the naked Western Digital drive in, and you feel it push past the pins until it seats with this satisfying mechanical snap. You peel the plastic film off the included thermal pad, press it down on the block memory chips, and slide the heavy aluminum cover back on. There's usually one tiny screw to lock the chassis together. That's it. You are done. For roughly $290, you just bypassed the entire consumer marketing machine. Why does this matter so much? Because you know exactly what is inside that metal tube. Western Digital cannot silently swap the SN850X to cheaper, slower QLC memory without the entire PC building community rioting and tearing them apart on Reddit. You are piggybacking on the accountability of the internal PC parts market, which is viciously strict, to get a vastly superior external drive. I ran that exact same 120 gigabyte 4K video transfer on this DIY setup. The fans on my Mac didn't even spin up. The drive peaked at roughly 2,800 megabytes a second, and when the cache finally filled up, it dropped to 1,500 megabytes a second, not 140. It just cruised at 1,500. The outside of the aluminum case got hot, which is exactly what you want. It means the heat is being physically pulled away from the fragile controller chip inside and pushed out into the air. When I first picked up one of these metal enclosures, I honestly expected it to be clunky. I figured it would be an annoying brick in my backpack. It is noticeably heavier than a plastic drive, but what surprised me was how much peace of mind that weight actually gives you. If the USB-C port on a retail Samsung or SanDisk drive snaps off or wears out, your drive is dead. You lose all your data unless you pay for a clean room data recovery. But if the port on my DIY enclosure breaks, I just unscrew it, pull my perfectly healthy NVMe drive out, and slot it into a new $100 enclosure. Your data isn't held hostage by a 50-cent soldered port. I haven't tested this specific Satechi enclosure long-term in an extreme environment yet, so grain of salt if you're taking it out into the desert. But for a studio, a coffee shop, or a standard travel bag, it's practically bulletproof.
But okay, I get it. Not everyone wants to assemble parts, even easy ones. If you're terrified of using a tiny screwdriver and you just want to buy a finished product off the shelf, what do? If it were my $150 and I just needed a reliable drive for general backups, grabbing photos, or working on the road without carrying a heavy metal brick, I'm buying the Crucial X9 Pro. It's tiny, but crucially, it's made of anodized aluminum, not plastic wrapped in an insulating rubber wetsuit, so it sheds heat reasonably well. And most importantly, Crucial didn't lie about the port protocol. It's a standard 10 gigabit drive. It advertises 1050 megabytes a second, and because they use a highly efficient controller and actual TLC memory, it hits that speed and it largely stays there. It's not trying to trick you with a massive fake cache that vanishes. It knows exactly what it is and it does the job.
So that's the reality check. Stop paying for specs you can't use. Avoid anything advertising 2000 megabytes a second unless you specifically own a Windows PC motherboard with a Gen 2x2 port. Avoid the rubber-coated rugged drives that quietly cook their own silicon to death. Take control of your own gear. Get the metal enclosure. Get the internal drive. I'll put links in the description to the exact enclosure and drive I'm using right now. They aren't sponsored, nobody sent them to me for free. It's literally just what is sitting on my desk right now, keeping my footage safe. Let me know down in the comments if you've had one of those premium external drives suddenly crash or throttle on you, because I'm starting to think the failure rate is way higher than the industry is admitting. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna go try to cool this Kingston drive down before it melts a permanent ring onto my desk. See you in the next one.